Okay, I think we can start. Raymond, are you ready to start? I will start off the event if you're ready. Raymond, I can't hear you.
Sorry, turning on my camera. Sorry, did you want to say a piece, Dr. Vik, or?
Yeah, so, okay, yeah, I'll start then. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking your Friday afternoon to be here. I'm not sure whether your connection is clear. Okay, the connection is unstable a bit. Okay, so it's our fifth research ed session for the semester. Normally we end in April. So in fact, for this semester, we have a May research ed session. And in fact, we have another one on the 4th of June. So stay tuned for the next flyer that will be out by today evening. So we have more presentation coming, which is something really good. So today it's a special event. It's a launch of the volume 27 of the International Journal of Bahamian Studies, special issue on the Hurricane Dorian, impacts, recovery, and future preparations. So now I'm going to hand over to the editor, Raymond Oenbring, to take over the session and introduce us to this volume. Over to you, Raymond.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Vik. In today's Research Edge, we have presentations of articles from a forthcoming issue of the International Journal of Bahamian Studies on the effects and aftermath of Hurricane Dorian, guest edited by three of my colleagues from English Studies, Dr. Saskia Fürst, Dr. Dustin Hellberg, and Dr. Ian Bethell-Bennett. I was very happy when three of my colleagues proposed this special issue on such an important topic. Research on topics relevant to the Bahamian way of life, or in this case, the continued existence of the Bahamian nation, is exactly what UB as an institution should be promoting. I was also very happy to learn that one of the papers in the issue is written by several recently graduated UB students. For a few of them, recent means yesterday. While my involvement in the articles in the forthcoming special issue has been largely limited to this month, I have learned a lot in this process. I believe that when it is finally published, hopefully within the next 2 weeks, it'll be something that all involved can be proud of. I now welcome Dr. Saskia Fürst, one of the editors of the special issue, to lead the rest of the presentation. Dr. Fürst.
Thank you, Dr. Oenbring, for that lovely opening and welcoming remarks. I would like to start off first and foremost by thanking both Dr. Oenbring and Ms. Virginia Balance for their very hard work in ensuring, along with us guest editors, that there is really a high quality of scholarly work included in this volume. And as Ray mentioned, they have been on board with us for this last month, but they have been tirelessly working together with us to bring this project to a completion. So we were ever so grateful to both of them. And I also want to thank Ray personally for taking the risk, I think, of letting me and Dustin and Tony put together this special issue. Not sure if he'll do it again, but thank you so much for giving us this space and this platform to put together this special volume and have it out for the project, for the public to read and be aware of and engage with. So just to give you a little bit of a backstory and how this volume came into being, Dr. Hellberg and I were literally just about a month and a half into our new jobs here at UB when Hurricane Dorian hit in September of 2019. Some of you might know that I was actually born and raised here, but I've been working in the US and Europe, so mostly Austria and Germany for about the last 20 years. And Dr. Hellberg is originally from the US, but was in South Korea before coming here. And so this was sort of our one of our welcomes to moving back to the Bahamas. It was jarring to say the least. And in the following weeks, we saw the pictures, we heard the stories, and all of the news coming out of Abaco and Grand Bahama. And we were fairly relieved that in the capital, Nassau, right, here in New Providence, that there was minimal damage all in all. It still took us a while to recover as well. But we felt that our monetary contributions, donating blood, even giving material goods to send down to those who needed it was just not enough. And we were quite aware that the trauma that Hurricane Dorian had left in the Bahamas would linger, both politically, economically, physically, emotionally. And this was already before COVID, right? So we were brainstorming on ways in which to address some of these long-term impacts, as well as trying to think of ways to assist the recovery efforts. And so we actually designed workshops that featured expressive writing as a way to deal with trauma for our UB students. And we also discussed putting together this volume along with Dr. Bethell-Bennett to focus on what other researchers and scholars were learning post-Hurricane Dorian. And so here we are today. I'm also very proud and very grateful to our contributors who worked with us on such a tight deadline and time frame to make this volume possible. So our call for papers actually only went out about May of last year. And so within a year, they have written works for us, edited it, and a few of them are here today to present to you some of their results and findings. As those of you who are here today are very much aware, with climate change, the number and intensity of hurricanes occurring in the Atlantic are increasing. While much research has been done on the geographical impacts of hurricanes to the Bahamas, little work has been done on sociocultural impacts and recovery efforts, as well as little work has been done on providing suggestions for strategies to better prepare for natural disasters, risk management, disaster recovery, etc., aside, of course, from some government reports. Within the Caribbean and small island developing states who are in the path of some of these storms and have often limited resources to combat and prepare for these natural disasters, the scholarly work that we are doing today or have done is crucial. The contributions to climate change, as we all know, is also fairly small here in the Bahamas and some of these Caribbean nations when compared to some of the impacts that we face. So in this respect, Puerto Rico and Barbuda have led the way, so to speak, with their works that have been published after the hurricanes Irma and Maria caused catastrophic damage to their countries in 2017. As I mentioned earlier, the Bahamas has very little work done in this area, and so our special issue volume seeks to fill this gap by featuring social, political, public, and private responses to Hurricane Dorian. The contributions here offer not only criticism of the lack of preparedness on the part of the nation of the Bahamas for such strong storms, but, and more importantly, they identify strategies and areas for improvement in preparation, as well as disaster management post-natural disasters like hurricanes, and ways to potentially reduce future risks to the Bahamas, be it economically, politically, socially, physically, mentally, personally, etc. We sincerely hope that our volume sparks further discussions and research for those beyond our borders who could benefit from our collaborative work and the lessons that we here in the Bahamas have learned from Hurricane Dorian. As Dr. Hellberg so nicely frames it in our editorial introduction, in this ever globalized world that we find ourselves in, where a vaccine for a highly contagious virus can be ready within a year, right? This is mind-boggling and really highlights what we as human beings are capable of. Let us not forget to return and come back to the local knowledges, local strategies, local sources of information, and ensure the continuity and prosperity of smaller communities that may indeed be forgotten on the global level. So thank you again so much for joining us today as we learn a little, hear a little, find out a little bit about the valuable works and contributions that are included in this special volume. Unfortunately, Dr. Bethell-Bennett had an emergency, so he is not at a PC at the moment, so he will not be able to present his contribution, which was titled Dorian, Unmaking Space, Policy, Place, and Dislocation. If he manages to join us before we are done with our presentations, we'll indeed slot him in at the end. And so I'm going to move on and ask our second presenters for today. And I'm not sure, is Natino here?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Wonderful. I just didn't see you come in. So their piece is titled A Weathered System, The Effects of Bahamian Government Negligence in the Wake of Hurricanes. And this contribution was co-authored by Diandra Armbrister, Donnie Miller Jr., Philip Moss, and Natino Thompson. And these are all recent graduates of UB. So Diandra Armbrister holds a BA in English language from the University of the Bahamas, and her academic work focuses on issues within feminism, masculinities, gender, and queer studies. Donnie Miller, also a graduate of UB, with a Bachelor of Business Administration in Economics and Finance. His most recent research project focuses on migrant groups in the Bahamas and the effect socioeconomic status has on their overall well-being. Philip Moss, also a UB graduate in the who has a Bachelor of Education in Secondary Certification, English Language and Literature. He recently presented a paper titled Diazagoon, an examination of the stigma surrounding positive male achievement at the 2019 Critical Caribbean Symposium. And the final author and speaker for today, Natino Thompson, also a graduate of UB, has a Bachelor of Arts in History and Psychology, and he recently published an article in the Yale Review of International Studies titled Heterosexism and Homosexuality, the Performance of Privilege and Secrecy in Bahamian Society. So I will ask Natino Thompson to please tell us a little bit more about your contribution. If you want, I think you can also share slides.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. So good evening, good afternoon. So we'll begin our presentation, and my colleague Diandra will set up the presentation, and we'll get further into our contribution. Okay.
Yeah, so these are our recent UB graduates who will be presenting. Do we need assistance with the technology?
Natino, I'm gonna need you to start the presentation, please.
So can you see it now?
No, we still can't see it.
Although it did say it started screen sharing.
Yeah, but we can't actually see the presentation.
Okay, so I already had it up on my end. I'm sorry. Let me try it again one more time.
Okay.
I'll just share the whole desktop. I was trying to share the screen. Can you see it now?
No.
It's black, so maybe it's just not on your first slide.
No,
Could that
actually,
be it?
no, I'm seeing it. Okay.
Okay.
I have it up on my end. I don't know what's going on.
Oh boy. Okay.
Is there anybody else having a copy of the presentation?
I'll just,
That phenomenon is like when you have the screen shared, but you're sharing the wrong screen or something.
Yeah. I think it's pointing to a wrong screen.
Oh, maybe you have a split screen set up.
still black?
Yeah,
Yep.
it's
Yeah,
still
okay.
black.
So it's telling me it's sharing, but however, it's showing up as black. So
It's our same presentation, right? Because I can
Yeah.
try to share it.
uh,
Maybe someone
The
else.
wonders of modern technology, right? For all that it makes it easier, it doesn't always work the way it's supposed to.
Sure. Okay, 1 second.
Dr. Bethel says she can present it if you send it to her, Natino. If that would help, I don't know.
Yeah, we all have access to the presentation, so I'll just try to open it. Just thank you for your patience. Thank you for bearing with us. I will open. Okay.
I must admit, I forgot to do the test run because I didn't have slides today. But normally when I have slides, I'm like, before we get started, let me check that the slides work and you can see them. But that was also a little bit of a mea culpa because today I'm going it without slides.
Okay. Okay, can we see my screen? I'm sharing the,
Yes.
okay, so we can see my screen. Okay, great. Okay, as I said, thank you again for your patience. We are so grateful for this opportunity to be able to submit to this particular issue of the International Journal of Bahamian Studies. So once again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diandra Armbrister, and I, along with my colleagues, will be presenting on our paper. It's entitled A Weathered System, The Effects of Bahamian Government Negligence in the Wake of Hurricanes. And so overall, our decision to submit for this particular issue was because we answered the call in the wake of Hurricane Dorian. We felt as citizens and as young people that our government just simply was not doing enough in response to recovery efforts. And so overall, our research objectives for this paper was to explore the economic impact of natural disasters in the Bahamas regarding Category 4 and 5 hurricanes by looking at the accounting and economic costs. We wanted to analyze the government's response, or more importantly, the lack thereof, towards hurricanes in the Bahamas. We wanted to assess how the lack of preparedness and assistance is a form of structural violence against its citizens, and we feel like this violence is ongoing. And then we wanted to address the possible alternatives, such as risk management, to mitigate the cost that hurricanes have on the Bahamas. And I would like to say again that with all four of us being from different schools and different disciplines, this was truly a collaborative effort. And so that is kind of reflected throughout the paper. As Dr. Fürst has said before in her introduction, we know that climate change is a very real concern for the Bahamas. Most of our islands, well, all of our islands are low-lying, and some of them are below sea level. And global warming and rising sea levels continue to contribute to the intensification and frequency of storms. And as a member of the Caribbean, we are one of the countries who kind of produce or contribute the least amount of certain harmful gases into the atmosphere, but yet we pay a very significant price in the way that hurricanes form and the damage that happens in the aftermath of those storms. And so the lack of significant action in the wake of hurricanes, most recently Dorian, shows that whatever plans that our government have in place have not been enough. And considering that storms are going to continue to intensify, this is something that we need to get on top of and that we need to take seriously. Just a note that we have in our paper that being a citizen and a legal resident of a country entitles one, to legal rights, obligations, and protections, especially in the aftermath of disasters, natural or otherwise, and successive governments, not just the current one, successive governments have failed the citizenry in the way that they have responded to these disasters. And once again, we have seen this particularly in the wake of Hurricane Dorian. At this point, I'm going to pass the presentation on to Donnie Miller, who will talk about the economic impact of damage after storms.
Good day, everyone. So in order to fully analyze the impact that these natural disasters through hurricanes have had on the Bahamas, we had to take a look at the GDP growth in the Bahamas and its impact on GDP growth. We have had little to no GDP growth in the last 5 years, and we are very vulnerable to external shocks. Some of the issues that have been exacerbated by hurricanes include, but are not limited to, increased usage of public goods and services, an increase in the unemployment rate, access to electricity, housing, and potable water. Two of the main issues discussed are the accounting costs, which is the dollar value that the storms have on our economy in terms of relief and repair efforts. And then also the economic cost that covers the accounting costs as well as the opportunity costs. So if you look at the table, next slide. So if you look at the table to the left, we see that the accounting cost would be the dollar value that each storm has cost the Bahamas throughout time. These are category 4 and 5 storms. And we look at the economic costs, which are other alternatives or things that we could have looked at to mitigate the costs. One important factor that I wanted to look at was migration, because that creates a shortage in the supply and demand of labor. We traditionally do not have a large traditionally agricultural areas, but when you look at the rule, people usually move to urban manufacturing areas, but this rule is not true to the Bahamas because we are heavily service-based. And we also will have to look at the insurance framework, because in many cases, people cannot afford to have insurance, people don't stay insured. And just because you have insurance doesn't mean that you will always be able to claim. And in a nutshell, we also have to look at risk management. That will also help to reduce the structural violence occurring in the Bahamas due to the lack of planning.
As it relates to planning, the first thing we wanted to discuss was using data and technology to inform policy and practice. And what that means is that we need to reframe our conceptualization of hurricane preparedness, because as it stands now, when we talk about hurricanes, we normally talk about them from June to November or just immediately preceding the hurricane season in about May, but that's just too late. So we need to change our idea surrounding hurricane preparedness and make it a continuous year-round process. Because as one of the notes in our paper says, according to Thompson, when not planned for, natural disasters become the precursor to humanitarian crises. And we saw that, for instance, with the poor shelter management and maintenance in Abaco and Grand Bahama, as well as when it came to private citizens having to use their personal jet skis to rescue one another in Grand Bahama as well. And we realized that successive governments' failure to proactively plan is detrimental to the welfare of the nation as a whole. And in that poor planning, one of the things that we wanted to recommend was decentralizing disaster preparation and management duties. And that means delegating and involving local governments in disaster management procedures. Because as you can imagine, people on the ground are more familiar with topography and geography. They are more likely to know which areas are more flood prone, as well as the fact that they will be able to mobilize, prepare, and respond faster and in real time to disasters rather than waiting on some NEMA director in Nassau to send word. And we realized that that leads to critical missteps in getting information out there, and that is at a huge cost. So we think that more proactive planning would ameliorate a lot of the unfortunate outcomes that we saw happen in the wake of Hurricane Dorian.
Okay, for this part of the paper, we talked about structural violence, and we had the video prepared, but I would encourage everyone to go watch Dorian PSA. It was a highly, a lot of people on social media, Bahamians on social media, thought that it was a tone-deaf kind of representation of them caring and talking about Dorian, and it didn't capture who really mattered. And the narratives from that, as well as the narratives discussed after Hurricane Dorian, we analyzed through a very qualitative method using a narrative analysis. And although we didn't get into syntactic or semantic analysis, it could have been done on particular words that were used, which I hated after Dorian. In particular, the Prime Minister used the word resilience so much that I don't know what to do. I don't really like that word very much, because what he means by resilience and what other people was thinking of that, the two different things and how they compare in terms of narratives, that's what this section of the paper deals with. And we dealt with a lot of the ideological forms, because structural, cultural, and epistemic violence are based on ideologies. And then because no perpetrator is actually committing the act of violence, what you have is institutional practices, institutional procedures. They become the forms in which you experience these acts of violence, and they are structural, cultural, and epistemic violence, right? When we move on, this kind of challenged the construct of the Bahamas, right? Because climate change, threatens to erase the nation, and I think that's very important. We discussed that. The Nassau-centric approach to governance and life. We talk about how it's dysfunctional. It needs to. We need to move away from it. And we've seen a more decentralized kind of approach, maybe in the colonial era, that maybe we need to think back on how we can incorporate and use. And then afterwards, what we did in the papers, we sought to reframe the questions, right? We reframed the questions that were asked in the video presentation by Sherrod Liborn. Why weren't we ready for Dorian? And I think that's important if we're going to unpack the structural violence. And then afterwards, we offered recommendations, like endowment funds, replanting of mangroves, investing in a fleet of jet skis. And in conclusion, when we think about, so we believe that this paper is a very crucial kind of addition to Bahamian research and studies. While we are honored to be a part of this special issue, and while the editors have attempted to make our paper stronger, cohesive, and provide constructive feedback, regrettably, we feel that some of the editors have used their power to change the overall critical tone of our paper for fear of legal consequences, victimization, and jeopardizing of their distinguished careers by publishing such a scathing critique, right? This has led us to feel as if we were silenced because of that fear. And while we are saddened by this, the fear is reasonable, because we know the kind of culture that exists when people give such a scathing critique of governments and the lack thereof in terms of their negligence. Therefore, we decided that while this paper is good and it will add to the literature, that we're also going to release an office version to help fill in the gaps that are not covered, and because of the constraints of the IJBS's mandate. And we just want to thank you for allowing us to have our moment here just to talk about what we've done over this past year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natino. And thank you very much to the contributors. Yes, I will admit their piece was perhaps a little bit scathing at times. And on behalf of the editorial board, we had to make a few adjustments and suggestions for changes. And I'm very pleased that in the end, the contributors agreed to these changes and to including their piece in the volume, because especially this concept of structural violence that they build in their paper, and how narratives that were being that were emerging and being disseminated after Hurricane Dorian often phrased or set what had happened and how, the process of recovery and dealing with the aftermath in a certain type of perspective or lens that allows us to not hold the government as accountable as we normally could, should, and would. But as we will see in future papers coming up, a lot of the ideas about ways in which we can move forward, at least for the Bahamas, is to include also private individuals and the private sector, and that a collaboration might be the best move forward, because indeed the government was overwhelmed, right, by Hurricane Dorian. And while we can make many arguments that we could have sort of seen this coming, right, with climate change and the increase in these stronger hurricanes, still no one anticipates a hurricane stalling over an island, right, and the kind of natural disasters that this brought on board. So we are indeed still very grateful that you agreed to contribute your piece, and we are of the understanding that all contributors feel that the relevant points have been brought into the piece, and the most useful ones for our ongoing discussion and for the mandates of the IJBS. I just want to mention, because I forgot to say this at the start, we will save our question and answer for the end. Again, since many of these papers speak well to each other, and sometimes some of the questions might be more general and can be answered by several of the contributors. So please feel free to type them into the chat group. I think that Dr. Nair, as well as myself, will keep an eye on those to raise them again at the end when we have our Q&A. Or make note of them, and be sure to ask them when we are finished with our presentations. I'd like to continue and introduce our next presenter, who contributed the article titled "The Responsibility of Community Sustainability from the Frontlines of Climate Change," and this is by Nastassia Pratt. She is a graduate of Ryerson University, where she received a Bachelor of Architectural Science. Her research areas include equitable accessibility and local activation of public space, cultural heritage infrastructure and environmental impacts on community planning in the Global South. And her most recent project focuses on adopting North American planning policy for the revitalization of a waterfront and public park in New Providence Island in the Bahamas. All right, you should be able to unmute yourself, Nastassia, and I will let you present your project.
Great, thank you, Dr. Fürst. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna just go ahead and share my screen here. Hopefully I won't have the same hiccups as my colleagues. Fingers crossed. Here we go. If it's not being shared, just let me know. I believe it is.
We can see it. Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. So that's a good start. We'll just go from there. Okay, yes. Thanks again for having me. As was mentioned by Dr. Fürst, this is the title of my paper, The Responsibility of Community Sustainability from the Front Lines of Climate Change. And I'm happy to be here to share it with you, so let's just get started. The first bit of what I was going to present has already been mentioned by Dr. Fürst and my colleagues, and it speaks to climate change and the immediate threat that we're facing here in the Bahamas and in the Atlantic Caribbean region. And as my colleagues also mentioned, the Bahamas is paying an extremely high cost for the impacts of climate change, and the nation's contribution to the problem is negligible. So yeah, this warming trend has caused, as mentioned, increased frequency, and it led to superstorms like Hurricane Dorian. We don't see this stopping unless climate change stops, which means that this is a real threat that we have to face head on. Putting our heads in the sand anymore just won't work. So what we're going to look at now is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change has identified small island developing states, or SIDS, a group of which the Bahamas is a member, as particularly vulnerable to climate change. And there is now a pressing need for sustainable community development that involves across multidisciplinary climate change adaptation approach that promotes resilience strengthening. So the three main areas examined in this paper are gaps in adaptation within Dorian hit redevelopment, adaptation within the national system of sheltering and evacuation, the need for social equity in planning for the protection of vulnerable communities. And in conclusion, I mentioned a few recommendations toward Bahamian climate change resilience. So for this presentation, the area that I'm going to focus on, just for the sake of time, will be gaps in adaptation processes within Dorian hit redevelopment. So we have three subsections that I'm going to discuss. That's the housing sector, damage versus redevelopment, agency through local inclusion and community engagement, mitigating through design and building code application. So let's just dive right in here. So the IPCC, which is formerly known as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, defines adaptation as a process of adjustment to actual or expected climate change and its effects. Resilience here is defined as the capacity of social, economic, and environmental systems to cope with hazardous event without changing the very essence that defines it, while also maintaining the capacity for growth. So that's the definition of resilience that I would like us to keep in mind throughout this discussion. So what we need is to have flexible adaptation planning strategies that are going to facilitate the ongoing rebuilding efforts of our Bahamian communities post-Dorian. So let's just keep going here. So the first area we're going to take a look at, of course, is damage versus redevelopment. The Inter-American Development Bank has found that Dorian caused damage to approximately 9,000 homes. And this is an estimated 1.48 billion Bahamian dollars in Abaco and Grand Bahama combined. This estimate of those homes damaged, they've also found that about 38% of those homes are not insured. Now, the newly formed Disaster Reconstruction Authority, or the DRA, which is the government agency tasked with managing rebuilding efforts, has been budgeted $10 million for these efforts. So that's $10 million for rebuilding efforts from the government versus 1.48 billion in damages. So that's quite a gap. And as mentioned by Dr. Fürst, we do have NGOs stepping in to try to fill that gap. With the onset of this pandemic that no one expected, we've had interruptions in this money actually reaching those who need the money to restore their homes. So one of the other areas we're going to discuss here are agency through local inclusion and community engagement. So the short-term efforts of rebuilding should be considered alongside with the long-term Bahamian climate change impacts that are arguably as important and also require financing. Some of these should be investing into deepening climate change scientific research, defensive environmental infrastructure, and zoning buffering of vulnerable coastal areas, which I think would be a particular challenge since everyone loves their beachfront properties, but we have to start to buffer these zones. Now, governmental climate change action is likely to be more of a long-term goal. However, on the level of community, intervention may be more immediately reachable through the concept of local inclusion. Encouraging climate change action or agency with Dorian hit residents is an important part of the adaptation process. So agency here is defined as an intervention or action to induce a specific effect. And a pathway to this is a planning tool that's called local inclusion. So what local inclusion is about is that it emphasizes more of a neighborhood-based or those who are from the area gathering this knowledge were locals or laymen who can offer a more context-specific understanding of the nuances of their surroundings, along with professionals, with both of these groups contributing towards the development process. So the third area that we'll look at, mitigating through design and the building code application. So the development of sustainable communities will require returning to what the late Bahamian architect, Jackson Burnside III, called common sense architecture. This is architecture that's harmonious with its natural environment. And that's executed through resilient strategies, such as passive design or net zero design. And the more that we have design professionals and architects and planners championing this type of resilient design, and also championing the policy that is responsive to climate change in the Bahamas, the more likely that we have areas like the hard-hit Marsh Harbor Abaco able to actually withstand another superstorm. So speaking of policy, a policy update that is long overdue is the revision of the Bahamas Building Code, or the BBC. And this was published, the third edition, back in 2003. This policy has not been updated since. This is very concerning. Hurricanes have since intensified to superstorms. The Bahamas is now a hotbed, which is a hotspot for Category 5 storms now. This is our new reality. So this policy, it needs to reflect our new reality. It needs to be ongoingly and rigorously revised if it intends to be relevant and actually helpful. Neglecting it, whether it's through its revision or enforcement, it's a real roadblock to creating a resilient built environment. So bridging the adaptation gaps in Dorian development, in the engagement with the places that we actually live in, and the Bahamas Building Code, these gaps need to be bridged yesterday. And that's especially so if the intention is to transform into a more resilient Bahamas. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. It's almost impossible to imagine or believe that the Bahamas Building Code is so outdated, right? And of course, there are issues around whether or not it's even being enforced, but that's a totally different story considering that it has yet to be updated. So your article and piece has some really good recommendations in there of areas that really need to be addressed moving forward. And even as far as how to protect or better protect vulnerable communities, right? Then a responsibility on private companies and citizens too who hire them. So I particularly like that section, I must say. So that's a teaser for everybody that you want to go read that article as well. Okay, so this brings us up to the next presentation by Dr. Dustin Hellberg that's on the piece included in the volume titled Raising Awareness of Expressive Writing as a Method for Alleviating the Trauma of Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas. And this was co-authored by myself and Dr. Hellberg. We both work in English Studies at the University of the Bahamas. I completed my PhD on the representations of older Black women in US literature and print ads at the University of Salzburg. My research interests and publications include the areas of African American studies, Afrofuturism, aging studies, film studies, and now Bahamian studies. Meanwhile, Dr. Dustin Hellberg has PhDs in English literature and the philosophy of science. He is the author of 3 books and many academic articles across many disciplines and fields, and he is currently an assistant professor of creative writing at UE. So, Dr. Hellberg, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Hi, everyone. First of all, I got a lot of people to thank off the bat. Everybody's who's attending today. The co-editors on this special issue, especially Dr. Fürst, who's been really the both carrot and stick behind the entire project. Dr. Oenbring for letting us do it, Virginia Balance for helping out, to all the contributors who gave really good articles to us. I think they're all excellent. To NAGB, as I'll explain a little bit later, Dr. Oriaki, Dr. Vik, Dr. Dika, and the Rotary Club, who gave us a little bit of seed money for this initial project. So as you can see here, or as Dr. Fürst explained, we had just been in the job for maybe a month and a half. That was my first time in the Bahamas. So we were adjusting to a new place. Dorian hits, and immediately we began a discussion. How can we help? What can we do? And we kind of came up with this idea to have expressive writing workshops. And these are basically like very highly focused journaling. And so we set up these workshops with some seed money from the Rotary Foundation in Nassau. And basically what people did was they would come in and we would have them write about traumatic experiences. Now, it could have been about the hurricane. It could have been about anything. And this is what the value of expressive writing, or sometimes it's called trauma writing, can do. It allows the mind to focus on it and thereby understand it and overcome it, rather than suppressing that trauma and then just letting it run wild in one's mind. But it is something that can be kind of initially painful. It is something that can be measured, though, to have very, very good outcomes. And so we wanted to kind of disseminate this to the students and to the broader community for people who might have been traumatized by Dorian, and you know, who wouldn't be. So we gathered together some students at UB and put them through this workshop. I came at it from an angle of creative writing. Dr. Fürst brought in some interesting meditation techniques, ways to calm down, ways to you know, focus on oneself, etc. And they were actually very successful, except for the time frame in which we were working. We weren't able to advertise things quite as effectively as we'd like, because we were new. We didn't know whom to ask about what, which forms needed to be filled out in order to be in this room, to do this, to borrow a pen. And so because of all of those effects of being new to the job, the advertising for it probably didn't reach as many people. We were given space at NAGB to hold a community-based one. I think 3 people might have shown up to that one. It was pretty underpopulated. But one thing we did stress is that these are techniques that aren't, they're not highly technical. You don't have to be a doctor. I don't have a degree in psychotherapy or anything, neither does Dr. Fürst. So these are things that, and techniques that these people can bring to their family, their friends, their community, and say, this helped me. It's something that's it's cheap, it's easily disseminated, and it's effective. And so we thought that overall, this idea of bringing these expressive writing workshops would be useful. I reached out to several professors in psychology who do work in expressive writing. They were very generous. They sent me a lot of their published papers because I couldn't access them via some of the databases. Everybody was super generous. And in the end, we surveyed. We had 18 people total show up. I believe almost all the respondents said that they found it useful. We had follow-up workshops and just to kind of track and see who was doing it and whether it seemed to be helping in some way, because PTSD isn't something that's immediate. PTSD in a traumatic event like this can take years to surface. And so giving people the tools by which to alleviate and mitigate that, I think is super important. And in the wake of Dorian, you know, we're going to be seeing more and more of this, and especially compound that with COVID, right? And so we're going to be seeing a lot more of this. And the Bahamas does not have, to my knowledge, I don't think that the insurance covers mental health treatment, things like that. I think you can get a screening, but treatment is not readily available. And so, it's if it is, it's expensive. And so this method of expressive writing, like I said, it's cheap, it's effective, and it's very easily disseminated among friends, family, community by word of mouth. And yeah, I don't have any slides or any cool presentations like the other groups so far. So I just wanted to kind of give an overview of what we did, why we did it, and what its effects were.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Hellberg, for telling us a little bit more about this initial project. And I'm not sure if you mentioned that there has been we got funding from the University of the Bahamas to conduct a more extensive and longer study on whether or what the impacts are and the effects of expressive writing. So studies have shown that it can actually alleviate physical health as well, problems that emerge due to emotional and mental stress, right, and trauma. But we were not able to do this with this initial sort of test run study for various reasons, limited funding, and things like that. And of course, then COVID hit. So we are in limbo as well, but we are ever hopeful that we will be able to follow through with this research project and actually have a few more quantitative results. You can tell we're not really social scientists. But what Dr. Hellberg perhaps didn't mention that I think was quite interesting, which may have a lot to do also with the makeup of the University of the Bahamas students, is that we also had a lot of women showing up for these workshops, but also there is a majority of female students at the Bahamas, and that was our most successful workshops were taking place on campus. But it was also an interesting insight into perhaps some common ideas, myths, or also ways in which gender is constructed in the Bahamas, that writing and journaling might be something considered quote unquote more feminine and thus be more attractive to women as a way of coping. But, you know, we will discover whether or not this holds true if we can do a larger study whereby we would hopefully also find a way to actively target. I mean, we had a good amount of male participants, that wasn't the issue, but they were not familiar with journaling as a strategy, whereas a lot of our female participants were already ahead of time. Like Dr. Hellberg said, everybody thought it was quite useful and felt already immediate benefits from the process. But there might be an interesting correlation with constructions of gender as to who would perhaps be more inclined to using this method. And of course, we are challenged here in general with stigmas around seeking assistance for mental health, right, and help. So, you know, and have to think about ways in which we can word our workshop that maybe avoid that phrasing to also get a few more people to join in, and how to disseminate this possible technique to alleviate some of the trauma that would then resonate or be attractive to both men and women living and residing in the Bahamas. So I just wanted to add that in. We got a grant.
I forgot about the grant, sorry.
It's very important. It's quite a process here to get a grant. So we're quite proud of that, and really do actually hope we can continue with that work. Okay, so it seems like unfortunately that our co-editor, Dr. Bethell-Bennett, is not able to join us today because of a personal emergency. He would have presented a little bit on his piece. So he has property in Abaco and went to Abaco shortly afterwards, and was, you know, there witnessing what was going on and wanted to address a little bit to issues surrounding vulnerable communities, what makes them vulnerable even before a natural disaster hits, but how then with a natural disaster, this exacerbates the situation, and mostly talking about the Haitian Bahamian residents in what are considered the shanty towns of Abaco. That's the mud and the pigeon peas, which made the news, and the recent demolition, right, of those areas, but also working class and the sort of lower Black middle class in Abaco that were also vulnerable, right, and would be harder hurt or impacted by Hurricane Dorian, and will continue to be, right, by future natural disasters. We also have a wonderful contribution on the core, for those of you who are not familiar with this group. It was a group of volunteers that organized very quickly after Hurricane Dorian passed over Abaco and then Freeport to assist in evacuating, relocating, rehoming people who had lost their houses, right? And also assist in getting goods down there, also getting volunteers to help with cleaning up and the whole process of basically recovering. And their article does a good job of showing how private organizations or groups of people and volunteers can be organized very quickly and are much more flexible, right, than the government. And some of the governmental agencies and organizations that are in place that should have been able to do this were not, right, for various reasons. And that these volunteer groups and private groups, you know, have many different resources at hand that they can tap into quite quickly, and that this should not be ignored. It shouldn't be what we rely on solely, right? But it should also be incorporated into future preparation and risk management strategies moving forward. So that, I think, basically sums up the contributions to our special issue on Hurricane Dorian. And I think on this note, hopefully I haven't forgotten anything, I'm going to thank one more time all of the contributors who are here today to give us their presentations. And I'm going to thank again Dr. Vik Nair for hosting this special research Edge event to focus on this upcoming launch for the IJBS, the International Journal of Bahamian Studies volume. And I think, should I hand it back over to you, Dr. Nair, for the Q&A, or Dr. Oenbring, or would you guys like for me to continue?
I think you can continue, Dr. Fürst, for the Q&A. I think there are a few questions on the chat box that I see.
Okay, so I did make note of a few and then I stopped because then I started chatting again. But I think very early, and this question is directed towards, where did I write it? Diandra, Donnie, Philip, and Natino, but perhaps can be commented on by other presenters, or if somebody who is here as a guest would like to make a comment, you can type and possibly we can even unmute you. There was a question on what does care look like in times of disaster, and whether or not you addressed this in your paper.
What does care?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, the thing is, we couldn't address that in our paper because I think we're still at the forefront of just deconstructing the narratives. So our main focus of the paper, and the reason why we highlighted the economic part is because, so let me go back. All right, in our presentation, I put this book I've been reading by Eddie Glaude Jr., Professor Eddie Glaude Jr., and it's contextualized for America, but I think that it speaks to us. The quote is, "The power of the Bahamian lie, it is the engine that moves this place. It transforms facts and events that do not quite fit our self-understanding into details of Bahamian greatness or features of our never-ending journey to perfection. The lie is the story that warps reality in this country, which means that resisting it involves telling in each moment a true story, one that casts the lie into relief, showing it for what it is." So when you talk about care, right, we can't even get into care because we're still dealing with the narratives that we've already produced that are consistent with the lie that we've told ourselves. And the lie is that the Bahamas is this paradise, this mythical paradise kind of nation where Black people have equality, right? And we know that to be far from the truth. The Bahamas is a white supremacist, neo-imperialist, and patriarchal, and all those other, it's that kind of society, right? And so when you talk about care, in order for us to get to care, we have to deconstruct the narratives and tell tell the true version of events that have happened. And so to answer the question, no, we didn't get to care. We gave recommendations of how policy could be moved forward, of how these practical solutions could happen that really don't have to cost us anything, like research, right? Even on the smaller scale. And so we didn't touch on care because, yeah, we're still deconstructing these false narratives, as we mentioned in the paper.
Okay, so if I can, sorry.
Oh, sorry. The person who asked the question, I think would you like to expand on it? It was Jay Williams. I'm not sure if Dr. Nair can give him then the microphone, while I think is that Donnie or Philip? You wanted to also respond? Mm-hmm.
Yes, well, I'll let Jay clarify first, and then I'll respond based on what he says.
Yeah, thank you. What I meant by care, like in terms of like mutual care, right? I know you, you know me, we look at each other, and that kind of care has a little bit of concern with it. But when that care becomes in the hands of the state, and then you start talking about structural violence, and Philip talked about, the jet ski drivers coming up. So what does care look like in a space and a time of disaster when the governments have failed, when they're supposed to be caring, when they're supposed to have, what forms of care look like in this particular space? That was like the question I was really, really trying to get to.
Okay, so to respond to your question, Jay, I would say that I think that's what, like Natino was saying, our paper talks about, in order for us to have any form of care, we have to address these critical issues and these narratives that have been formed. And we can extrapolate from our paper, like Natino said, we made recommendations about what we can do. But in terms of what it looks like at the governmental level, care could mean, just as we said, we need more proactive planning. It can mean, local and community involvement and something that's mandated by the government. So rather than having the haphazard sorts of planning that we see with regards to hurricane shelters and getting people to move, like I made a note with involving local governments, I can say as someone who is from Eleuthera, it is a lot easier. It is a lot easier to get someone who is from there to talk to you about, your area is flood prone. This particular part where you live, it's likely to be flooded, and to get them to move to a shelter that they feel is adequate. But in order for that to be done, the government needs to have these adequate resources in place, have the hurricane shelters ready so that people know. And when, they see a comforting face, they will be more than willing to move to shelters, because I know there's a lot of recalcitrance when it comes to getting people to move in terms of natural disasters. In addition, it means the government having things like, the rescue vessels ready when disasters strike, because we know our state is very aquatic. So, like I said, and like I made a note in the paper, successive governments have that seem to evade successive governments' mind that we need some more rescue vessels, so that if private citizens want to help, they can, but they shouldn't be that responsibility shouldn't be borne by private citizens. So I don't know if that helps answer your question a bit more, Jay.
Okay, it says it does. All right. Dr. Nair also had a question about mitigation and recovery systems here in the Bahamas. Let me see if I can find it really quickly exactly, but basically along the lines of why there are no stronger systems in place, or hold on, let me just see, the chat group is going crazy. Okay, nope. And whether this is an issue of lack of funding, lack of, I don't know, we could say interest. And I think that Dr. Bethel responded on this, but perhaps, I think this is open perhaps to the whole panel of presenters. Would you like to comment on why this is still an issue today?
Sorry, Natino, were you gonna say something?
Go ahead, I'll go after you.
I realized we muted our mics at the same time.
Go ahead, go ahead.
I don't necessarily feel that it has been a lack of funding, and to put it very simply, a lack of vision. as well as a lack of care. I think that not enough of our government officials realize the tenuous position that we are in and the issues that they should be concerned. And I'm sure that I think that it's very important to say that we are not just criticizing the government because we can criticize the government. We understand that, surely being in a position of leadership means that there are some, there are going to be difficult decisions that have to be made, of course. However, I think that it's a little disingenuous of our government, that you go towards a governing body like the United Nations, and you say to them, we are a small island developing nation and climate change really affects us, and to appeal to bigger countries, to take climate change seriously, and then in your own country you're not taking issues such as climate change seriously. So I really think that it is the lack of care and concern on our leadership part. I think that they have probably looked at other things they might think deserves their attention, and oftentimes there seems to be as well that we kind of have this culture that we don't pay attention to certain things until it gets really bad, or if we do pay attention to a particular issue, we look for very like topical, like Band-Aid quick fixes, as opposed to getting to the root of issues and addressing them and working on, clearing them up and ensuring that policies are put in place to, to ease, I guess, the way that things function.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with Diandra. I think the instance that she's referencing is when the Prime Minister stood up in the United Nations is talking about, we don't contribute that much to greenhouse gas emissions, but yet we suffer the most. And then you come back in this country and you use the word resilience, you use these dog whistles, right? I call them dog whistle, right? And you get your base riled up because they're the ones that are going to support you. You're politicizing the whole incident, shifting blame from your negligence to undocumented immigrants. And then you sit back and just you have a great laugh. And I want to echo that we're not just criticizing them just because we could, right? But if this is what has been done to us, when someone said, when your citizens, when your own countrymen tell you that this does not feel good, it doesn't make us feel as if you value us. It doesn't make us feel like you care about us. Like what more do you need from your people? Like they've said it out of their mouths, right? They've said it in a number of ways, right? Like, I don't understand how, so when Dr. Vik asked the question, why are we still struggling? We're still struggling because we don't prioritize these pertinent issues. In the paper, we talk about how Japan in 1993 built a whole tank, like just to solve their underwater, their flooding issues. And watch this, don't tell me that kind of ingenuity doesn't exist here, right? It does, right? But it's how we prioritize education. It's how we prioritize social services. It's how we prioritize Junkanoo Carnival. It's all of these things. It's how we prioritize transnational companies over the quality of life of our people. And that is the white supremacist ideology. That is the kind of oppression that Bahamians exist under, and to say anything else is just like I said, like I quoted, it's in conjunction with that lie we've told ourselves. And if we're going to come to this realization, if we're going to get out of the cognitive dissonance, if we're going to snap into reality and see what those the 60% of Bahamians see, then you have to be willing to confront the lies that you've told yourself about the Bahamas being a mythical paradise, because I ain't experiencing it. I'm a broke college student who just graduated. And watch this, when I go out tomorrow, I'm still trying to find work. That reality haunts me every day. I live that. And I'm not going to sit here and perpetrate your lie to make you feel more comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think you're talking about the legacy of colonialism that, of course, Black Bahamians perpetuate to today. But I think Nicolette has a response. So I'm going to let Nicolette go.
Thank you so much for letting me speak, but I don't know if I could add anything to what Natino just said. All I wanted to do was to say that in that very specific response, that over my lifetime, I have witnessed how hurricane preparedness has deteriorated. It was not all, the last few hurricanes that we've had, I've been in shock in the way in which we've responded and the way in which we prepared, because there was a time when there were protocols in place, they would not clearly be sufficient now, given the kinds of hurricanes that we're having, but at least they would have been a great foundation. But what I have witnessed is that they have been allowed to lapse. They have disappeared with the attrition, as I said, in the civil service, with all this over politicizing of policy and the frequent government changes. Many of the things, the systems that originally existed have disappeared. That's all I wanted to say.
But if I could add, sorry. While Dr. Nicolette Bethel was thinking, because I was thinking about, it's sort of like how Bahamians know, oh, what's the poisonous fish that we like to eat so much? Barracuda. So it's like that delicate, like it's I liken it to that, right? About how you have to delicately slice off the pieces just to ensure that you don't get poison, right? It's doing that kind of dance. So so when Dr. Nicolette Bethel talks about how it's not like that, it wasn't like that in the old days, right? But I think about, but colonialism was there. So how do you dissect those great policies from this like intolerable colonial past? And that's where decolonization comes in, right? And that's what I've been talking about. And I think that I've been trying to advocate for my entire 4 years at UB, right? That like, how do we use what worked, but don't carry over those legacies that only oppress Black people? And see, like, that's the dance we're doing today in the Bahamas.
I would also hazard a guess that I've only been back to the Bahamas recently, try to keep abreast of what's going on, but the focus also seems to have shifted, into, like Natino said, prioritizing certain things like tourism, getting certain jobs available, that's like a band-aid on this issue of unemployment and, lack of preparedness for many different disasters, COVID being just the most recent one that we can see, right? That at a very basic level, certain things are not working here in the Bahamas, right? And that we probably need to take a little more time to restructure healthcare and, NIB and, it's disturbing to witness, right, how quickly we fall apart the minute we don't have our tourism industry to rely on. And perhaps, right, yes, it's nicer to have the hotel that's built on the beach that'll bring in the tourists and, bringing in the cruise ships and all of these things that are, going on and seem to be allowed, shifting focus away from some of the issues that would allow, as a country and as a nation to be better prepared for disasters that are coming, or, in general, I would say, that of course are not popular, they're not easy fixes, these are long-term remedies, and perhaps it has something to do with, of course, the cycle. Some of these things cannot be resolved within a 4 or 5 year term, and, as we come into elections again, it's like, whoa, there's a flurry of projects going on in my neighborhood. I'm like, oh, this is super exciting, but it takes the year before an election, or, however close we are to it, right? To see and these are agricultural projects, right? Small ones, but I'm like, this is awesome. They're local community initiatives that I'm like, why is this only happening now? So, this is a little endemic to the system. But I think that we have a question from, I'm gonna butcher your name, Kaitra Wilma.
Hi, my name is Keitra Vilma. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I just wanted to add a little bit to the conversation. I am the country leader for OM in the Bahamas and the regional director for the Northern Caribbean for OM Caribbean. And we are an NGO, and we respond to the Hurricane Dorian, and we respond to different disasters. We have other aspects of what we do. But a part of what we have been doing is also responding to the disasters in the Caribbean. We're doing something in St. Vincent right now as well. And one thing I wanted to just add to the discussion, and I'm hoping that there can be more conversations, is I actually witnessed in the shelters where the shelters were literally waiting on food to come in for persons. We were in the shelters, mainly persons from Marsh Harbor, mainly from the mud, were in some of the smaller shelters where we were. And they were waiting for some food to come in directed through NEMA, and it just wasn't happening. There was a lot of challenges, as we all know, purpose of this time together. However, I actually believe in terms of word care, is that in order for care to happen as well, the private citizens have to have a level of empathy and ownership. And we saw that, especially in the very beginning. In the very beginning, you know, we do very well. Most of us do very well with the immediate, but it's this medium to long-term ownership. And I just saw it was just very encouraging to see churches, just random people dropping off things. But I think that we have to look at care, yes, from a government point of view, but if the systems that's in place are not working, we do still need to, I would say, have conversations about what does it mean to have medium to long-term empathy and just wanting to just have ownership to say, these are still my people, these are my people. So that was something I just wanted to add of care. I know there's more so on the government basis. Another thing too, I would like to add is training. So we've done disaster response training. We have we've been doing it, and it's on a small level, but those in the private sector, they desire one tool. Because clusters, and you have the UN groups, and you're talking about cluster groups, and how do I navigate the NGO world, and I want to be able to help effectively. A lot of persons did not feel equipped to be able to do that. So I think a lot of training and I think just having those opportunities for the public to be trained. And I believe that was also touched on as well. So I just wanted to add to that. And the last thing I will also add is in terms of the creative writing, I think it's beautiful. And maybe an idea to get more guys is we've been doing some art in St. Vincent and maybe having a collaboration. So if you're doing something, have it where it's creative writing and art. And you might find more guys, they may be more open to coming out to it. And they can, if they're not going to write, they just have the space where they can do the art. And then that could be a form of working through their trauma. So those are the things I just wanted to add to the conversations. And yeah, thank you very much. And I'll put my details in case anybody want to talk some more. And yes, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you so much. I was just going to say, please do put in your contact information. I'm sure that several of us will be reaching out to you. You brought up 3 topics, and I'm sure there's lots of responses to each of them. May I just ask, Jay Williams, did you have a question so that perhaps some of the panelists can respond before? Is that okay, or did you want to follow up?
I don't know. I was asked to unmute, so I was gonna actually follow up. Just only adding a tiny bit. In terms of what Viola said, is it correct? I hope I got her name right. Velma said, in terms of the private care. I'm actually living in Canada at the moment, and we've had overwhelming response from our community at Trent here to help with Dorian. In terms of the private sector collaborating with government entities or outside of government entities, we were, I don't want to use the right term here, but we were accosted with a kind of another form of violence within our own private, like we were trying to give money to a company who then took that money and used it for other funds. So we are on our own trying to feel in the grief and our empathy and act in our way to say, here is our contribution, here is our show of solidarity, even from this diasporic space, you know, right? And then now you take that opportunity to then use that for your own disadvantage. and you don't put those resources in the hands of the people who need it. So in terms of talking about care and even care within the private communities, I think there needs to be some ethics, terms of ethics of care, and some accountability in the terms of care and in terms of, yeah, but how do you buffer that when you're trying to make that connect? How do you alleviate the own damage we do to our own selves in terms of, yeah, in our own communities in our way, outside of the private entity, but within ourselves as a community? How do we treat ourselves in that kind of way? How do we respond to ourselves ethically? How do we respond to ourselves that holds each other accountable to the actions and to the causes, right? I don't know.
Okay, I unmuted myself. A lot of questions there, right? And I think a lot of space for further discussions. I think I perhaps just want to comment on one or two things very briefly. And one is that, of course, I had plenty of people also in Europe, right? So former work colleagues and friends reaching out to me asking, like, how can we assist and help and know that our money actually goes where it needs to go? And let me tell you, down here, we had the same question too, right? Like, how do we know that, you know, the stuff that we're dropping off at MPCC is actually going to get on a boat and get to the shelter in the mud that needs it? And it wasn't always happening. So, you know, accountability, as we know, is not a strength here in the Bahamas, nor is transparency always. And this, of course, leads to a lack of care if we, you know, look at it in that context. So I think that actually, and so I'm going to put in a push again, why you want to go check out our volume once it's available, is that each of the pieces speaks to this, right? Ways in which, excuse me, sorry. The ways in which that either we as individuals can try to do our part, of course, the ways in which coming together in as private individuals into a volunteer group that then actually converts into NGOs, right? How this, you know, is a possibility in a way of moving forward, working in collaboration with the government, of course, right? Challenging some of the narratives that the government is putting out there that does extreme harm to certain communities, but also disrupts and perhaps shifts the focus, you know, away again from the accountability, from really tackling what didn't work, right? So that we can put these policies into place and understanding that it's not just about, you know, looking good for foreign investments and for tourism. It's not just about getting reelected, right? It's about these long-term, you know, structures that are weakening, perhaps, that aren't really there and in place. And I think there were some comments in the chat about how we can see through the pandemic and COVID-19 some clear weaknesses, if not total breaks in our civil service and government support systems here, that I think the people here, we need to challenge the government on this and ask for more, right, better, but it's, you know, an exchange. And I really do like that. And I think we got a lot of this also in our papers and in the discussion today, that while we, of course, will, can, and should hold the government accountable and ask for better preparedness, better risk management strategies, updating policies, things like this, it's also on us, right, as individuals, as well as coming together in smaller communities to contribute and find ways to help. And we have these initiatives that we're going to follow up on for sure, right? How to make, I think Ms. Vilma brought up a good point, right? How to get training to more people, to encourage these long-term strategies at local levels. Definitely hoping that our creative writing project will continue. Also hoping that this volume sparks more papers, more projects, more discussions, and perhaps we can organize something for the fall that will provide a little more space for ongoing talks. But I think that we're going to slowly but surely wrap it up here, if that is okay, Dr. Nair.
Yes, you can start wrapping up. I'm not sure whether Dr. Oenbring have anything to say before we close the event for today.
No, nothing specific.
Okay, great.
Could I just say something before you end, please?
Sure.
All right. I think that I know Dr. Fürst talked about Dr. Armbrister maybe not doing this again, but I think we need to look at, and we have to know, like, I'm gonna have the conversation because I don't know when I'm gonna be able to, right? We have to have more special issues like this, right? And I'm gonna bring up the race thing here because it's important, right? White people represent about, I think, 5 to 10, less than 10% of the population. We need more lecturers of color. We need more people of color writing papers in order for our voice to be heard. That's just the facts, right? You can't, we have to be open to having these difficult dialogues. And I know that you are willing to have them, but there are gonna be some unpleasant things that you're gonna have to hear in order for us to really feel comfortable enough to share what we've experienced. Dorian was very traumatic. And I hated going through the semester, having to deal with all that I had to deal with because it felt like a burden. It felt as if we were neglecting our own. And for me, writing this paper was a form of trauma writing, as Dr. Hellberg talked about. This was the way that I processed that, honestly, because I was infuriated. How could our government do this to us? How could we do this to us? How could we continually neglect Grand Bahamians? How could we continually neglect the Abaconians? And I'm talking about the undocumented people of Abaco. For me particularly, and I know this may come off as emotional, but for me, I understand the constraints under which all of us are under. But if we don't have these difficult conversations, the only thing we're doing in these conversations is sitting up in our ivory towers pontificating, and I'm not about to do that. And we have to have more special issues like this to discuss these important matters. And you might as well get used to it because I have more papers to submit to the journal. So that's just what's happening. All right.
We are very excited about your enthusiasm, and we agree with you wholeheartedly, which is why it's Dr. Hellberg, Dr. Bethell-Bennett, and myself approached Dr. Oenbring about a special issue. That was a little joke. I am sure that I can convince him to do a few more special issues. There might also be other platforms and spaces for this, right? So we do know that academia operates, within its own structures, confines. There are certain expectations that, that we work within, even as we try to break down some of these barriers and open up more possibilities. But that is why the local level, local knowledge local involvement is so important at the grassroots level, right? There are less restrictions, there are more possibilities and spaces for mobilization. This country loves WhatsApp and social media. I think these are spaces too where we should have these conversations. And I am going to challenge you and encourage you, Natino, right? To come to us with an idea and a platform and a space, and we will do our best, depending on how good or not this fits in with UB, right, of promoting and supporting that. And it might be something that operates then outside with support, from many of the faculty members and the students. Is also maybe something that can be housed in UB too. So we definitely would love to see something like a graduate, undergraduate publication space opening up, right? For more spaces for the works for students to be featured. And because you guys are bringing out great stuff. I read it all the time, so I know, but we don't have a space for that yet. So we're working on this. Give us also a little time, right? Just as, we're gonna work on, encouraging both local citizens and the government to be better about being prepared for future disasters, right? Work in progress. So we hear you, we acknowledge, and we will continue to work on this. I think all of us who are here today, hopefully will take something with you forward that you can use to continue either the discussion, create change, motivate change, initiate change. Thank you. Dr. Nair?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Fürst, for the interesting session today, and thank you for everyone for coming today and all the presenters. I think it was an excellent session. You can see how important is the subject, which is what I put in the message, that I think this is an excellent topic for a national debate. So let's hope maybe one day this topic is going to be well discussed. So it's a good start. It's good to see students are very enthusiastic on this topic and more topics of such that will that will give you opportunity to even have a special student session in Research Edge even in the future. So more things coming forward. So as I've said at the beginning, this is not the end of Research Edge for this semester. We still got one more session that is coming on the 4th of June. So it is also related to Hurricane Dorian. You see, sustainable groundwater management in the Bahamas. So this is the science aspect of it. The presentation will share the unique need for and challenge related to groundwater monitoring and management in the Bahamas. So we have two excellent presenters that is coming for this special session from Israel Wash. And if you're keen to come for this session, please do register. These flyers will be out by today evening to all. So anyone is keen, just click on register and we hope to see you in the session. So with that, once again, thank you for supporting this event. We do hope for you to continuously support us in all our events in the future. Do stay safe. It's a weekend, and we do hope to see you in our session on next Friday. So thank you. We will make this recording of the session today available to all who have registered today. So no worries if you missed any part of the presentation, okay? It is recorded. As long as you have registered, you will get a copy of the presentation today. So thank you and see you again next week. Bye-bye.